Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melissa Herder. I'm from the Alumni Relations Office at the Stamps School of Art and Design, and we're thrilled to be hosting this virtual event celebration in honor of Earth Day. I know we're all eager to hear from our panelists, so we'll jump right in. I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Pisarczyk, who is one of our student MCs for the event. Sarah, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Earth Day and welcome. My name is Sarah Pisarczyk, as Melissa said, and I'm a sophomore at the Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design. I'm really glad that you could join us today for our Stamps at Home Sustainability Art and Design event. Before we get into it, we're really eager to hear from our panel of alumni, and the event will run from now until 5:45. We'll hold a question and answer period at the end of the session. So we encourage you to submit your questions for our panelists by using the chat function on your taskbar. And just a couple other housekeeping items quickly. You've all been muted upon entry, and we ask that you remain so to provide an equal listening experience for all of our attendees. We strongly advise that you select the speaker view on the right side of your screen for an optimal viewing experience. Live captioning is available today during our program, and to view those captions, please click on closed captions at the bottom right of your screen and then choose show subtitles. We will be sharing a recording of today's presentation, including captioning, on our website and social media channels. For technical assistance at any time during the event, you can use the chat function and send a direct message to our team. My fellow Stamp student and ambassador, Casey Rowe, and Stamp staffer, Melissa, are ready and available to help. A little bit more about myself. I'm currently focused on industrial and graphic design within Stamps, but I also have a passion for the environment that I've gotten to explore through the Naples Ceramic Water Filter multidisciplinary design team. On this team, under the instruction of Professor Joe Trumpey, I've learned about co-designing with a global partner and the process of design build work with our NGO partner, Care and Development Organization, Nepal. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Joe Trumpey, who is a transition designer, science illustrator, farmer, and educator. As an associate professor at the University of Michigan, he holds appointments at the Stamps School of Art and Design, LSA's program in the environment, and the School of the Environment and Sustainability. He is the director of UM's Sustainable Living Experience, a living learning community for first-year undergraduate students. He and his family live off the electrical grid in a straw bale homestead that he designed and built. There, they grow half of their annual food, and they haven't burnt a gram of fossil fuel to heat their home, water, or cook in the past 12 Michigan winters. And with that, Joe, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Happy Earth Day, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Big thanks to Melissa for pulling this together. I think this is the first Stamps focused Earth Day event in my memory. So this is great to have everyone together, especially, boy, what a difference a year makes. I mean, last year there were big plans for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day here on campus, especially with U of M's important connections with the first Earth Day, and all of that kind of fizzled out with COVID. And think back a year ago, we weren't even part of the Paris Accords. And here we are today, thankfully celebrating Earth Day together. And the Biden administration has us back into Paris, and had a big conference today with 40 world leaders talking about climate. So I'm anxious to hear what's going on. Thanks to all of you for making the time. Hopefully you haven't been zoomed out. I know it's the end of the semester for the Stamp students. Boy, we're just finishing 2 days of sophomore reviews. So both Sarah and Casey had successful reviews yesterday. So it's been a lot of Zoom time. So I'm glad you're all here. So grateful for all of that. I think we'll just start with each of our panelists briefly introducing themselves and telling you about what they do and their connections to creativity and the environment. So let's start with Eric.
Thank you, Professor Trumpey. You are living my dream where you are out there in that land. So hope to one day be living in the same way that you are. I'm Eric Benson. It's nice to be here today. I went to the University of Michigan. I graduated in, I think I'm old now, 1998. That's when I left. I specialized there in graphic and industrial design. I got both when I was there. Now I'm an associate professor at the University of Illinois in the Big Ten. So I guess a little bit of a competition there. I run a nonprofit called Renourish, re-nourish.org. And all the work that I do is focused on drawing down our greenhouse gas emissions through our creative efforts. And part of the last part of my introduction, I'll just say that I'm doing that currently at my paper making studio. It's called freshpress.studio. And I'm at the university and I'm working with farmers. We're currently exploring hemp to make, and prairie grass to make what we hope to be carbon negative materials. So we're drawing more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting in. That's our goal. We're able to do it probably with our prairie grass papers. We're pretty excited about that. So I'll end there.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Faye?
Hi, everyone. My name is Foen. I'm the Director of Green Infrastructure at the Greening of Detroit. I'm a native Detroiter, born in Northwest Detroit, grew up, spent more years in Metro Detroit. I'm glad to hear so much industrial design because I also graduated a BFA Industrial Design in 2004. After that, I served as a small business advisor in the republics of Guinea and Mali, West Africa, McCabe. And after that experience, I really wanted to focus in sustainable development. And for me, I had the least knowledge on the third pillar of ecological and the environment. So after I graduated in 2011 with my Master's of Landscape Architecture from U of M, I worked my way as an intern all the way up to now my current role as a director at Greening of Detroit. But in between that, I also worked in the private industry in landscape. And so the experiences from both of my times at the University of Michigan have been really important to my work. One last part, at the Greening of Detroit, my work really focuses on rebuilding Detroit's tree canopy. At the same time, some of the work that we do isn't just within these city boundaries, it applies throughout the region and in many other cities in Detroit. So I think about that. Also, I focus on distributing, as much as possible, distributing these limited number of tree resources as equitably as possible. And I'll pass that on.
Awesome. Thank you, Faye. Daisy.
Happy Earth Day, everyone. I'm Daisy Hall, she, her, hers. I just graduated in December of 2020, so congrats to anyone else graduating this year. At U of M, I spent time mentoring for the Sustainable Living Experience. I also did ceramic water filter research, and for my study abroad, I went to Nepal and worked with the Care and Development Organization alongside Joe Trumpey. I've since been working at a picture framing company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I was born. Lots of fun. And in May, I'll start a 6-month internship with the Student Conservation Association / AmeriCorps in upstate New York, where I'll be doing park ranger type work, as well as working at a fish hatchery. It's nice to meet you all. And yeah, I'm out there on experiences, lots of different stuff.
Great. Thank you, Daisy. Micaela?
Hi, everyone. Happy Earth Day. I'm Micaela McCabe. I graduated from U of M in 2013 with a BA in art and design and also a BA in international development. I currently work as an industrial designer for a company called Leapfrog Brands. We have 3 housewares brands that sell at big box stores like Target, Walmart, Meijer, Costco. I primarily head up design for our more kind of eco-focused brand, which is called ELO. We design products like water bottles, travel mugs, and glass food storage. In 2019, I was also given the position of Director of Social Impact for the company. We kind of started as a startup, entrepreneurship, no resources, kind of scrabbling from everywhere, and we've reached the growth point where the very kind of capital-focused heads of the company were like, okay, we're feeling a little more stable, like how can we take the resources we have now and help with our community and express some more like value-driven efforts. So I've been working on running that. My focus has been on exploring how brands and products can express values and enact them in the world, and learning how these values can be better represented in the world of mass production and entrepreneurship, which is so capital focused.
Terrific. Thank you all. So I thought we would start with some general questions that kind of overlap everyone, and we'll maybe start talking about the environment first. So maybe if y'all could reflect on what you see as some of the biggest sustainability challenges ahead that we can think about as a community and scale a community accordingly to what you find important, as well as what we think about as individuals. And how does that motivate you and the creative work that you do, or any of the work you do? Anybody feel free to jump in. We don't need to go round robin saying folks.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in on this one. I guess two of the main concerns that I see is belief in science as a form of politics. We've come out of a really difficult political time and are still kind of transitioning with that, in my opinion. And it seems as though climate change, vaccinations, general health concerns are becoming more of a front for political beliefs and how we align. So trying to mitigate that and change how we're having a conversation with each other in terms of sustainability and climate change in that, and try and bring it around to human needs rather than political needs. And then also, I would say investment in sustainability. We have a huge wealth gap right now, and we're putting a lot of sustainable and I guess environmental wishes on the general public rather than large scale corporations. We really need to hold them accountable on investing in sustainability rather than the individual. So I guess putting direct pressure on that as an individual would be good.
I'll come at it two angles. I mean, there's a slew of areas that really need good people to work on. Microplastics. I'm working on reforestation, conservation of land, conserving the things that we already have in terms of unique ecosystems and natural areas. But I kind of want to say broadly that in terms of sustainability challenges, like awareness, education, and action is kind of a cliche term, but I think as individuals, even as a community, but let's start as an individual, is that pick an area, like an issue that you're really passionate about, or an area that you think your grandma might be interested in, or someone on your basketball team, or pick a challenge that affects someone that you don't know, right? In another neighborhood, another community, because we know that environmental impacts are shouldered by communities with the least resources, especially communities of color, rural communities. So the more that we can, and this is kind of especially at students, right? Because the more experiences that you have, and that could be through travel or diving deep into your community, whether it's faith-based, your neighborhood, like really understanding that is going to give you the best opportunity to address challenges, because they're complex for a reason. There's multiple stakeholders, like whether it's community, corporate, institutions, and municipalities, and being able to understand where people are coming from and what systems that they're working within helps you to understand where the solutions overlap or the problems, but it also gives you the opportunity to get gaps. And those are the areas that are not being addressed. So
Sure, I would say to add on to both what Daisy and Faye said was, I would add on the element of time. So with all the education that needs to be done, which surprisingly is a lot, and alarmingly is a lot, where design can play a really good, creative people can play a really big role in that, right? But we're up against a wall of time. We did politically lose 4 years on that, but at the same time, solar and other renewables are the cheapest they have ever been. Government had no responsibility for that pretty much whatever in the past 4 years. So we can work on this without government, but we also will need, manufacturing is the largest contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions. We need bigger companies to step up, and we don't have a lot of time to get that to happen. So now that we do have more governmental power towards whether it be regulation or funding change, I think that's going to be highly beneficial to this. But we have a certain amount of time to cut 50% of our carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's 10 years. Now it's 9. So it's time is a huge element with this.
For sure. I think with my work, I think a lot about the culture of consumption. So recently, again, tied into political things, recycling, the whole recycling industry, which was already kind of a facade, has gotten even worse, where there's not really a market for it. And there's this whole marketing culture of like, oh, we'll just recycle it, plastic is fine. When the reality is that it's not. So focusing more on reduce and reuse, stepping away from the culture of fast fashion, where if something's dirty or scratched, you just throw it away, and kind of shifting culturally toward items that will last and items that aren't just contributing to that cycle of trash and production and mass consumption, especially in the US. We see just really cavalier attitudes toward it.
Great, thank you all. So now maybe we can shift a little bit to think about the creative process and your role as creatives in the field. I'm curious to hear you reflect on your role as a creative. I think almost every one of you is working on probably highly interdisciplinary teams, and certainly I've experienced as being the creative that you're kind of the weirdo on the outside a lot of the time. And, how do you use that outsider advantage? I mean, so maybe we can try to quantify or qualify some of that advantage of a creative process, and, the kinds of things that you've seen and experienced in communicating, creating, moving a project forward.
I can jump in on that. I think the thing about sustainability work is that, we don't have the solutions. We have some solutions, we don't have a perfect solution. So it's calling for innovation. It takes a creative mindset to push forward creative and eco solutions that don't, in a world that doesn't necessarily prioritize that. So trying to get buy-in from people who have other priorities and other perspectives. In my work, we spend a lot of time thinking about how can we not only make solutions like products that can replace single-use plastic, but how can we make them enticing? How can we make them accessible? How can we make them convenient? Because at the end of the day, convenience trumps so much. Like you're walking out the door, and if your water bottle is too hard to clean, you're just going to grab the Dasani. That's how humans behave. So we spend a lot of time coming up with creative solutions, and then using our specific skill set as designers to help people kind of imagine themselves into that new habit. So as the creative on the team, we've got the drawing skills, maybe the video skills, to maybe storyboard or draw, show an example of how people can change their lives, how the company can kind of change its processes. We say that if somebody is picking up a product, if they start saying oh, I could use this on my way to yoga on Thursdays, if they start kind of imagining it into their lives, they're much more likely to buy it and actually use it. So if we can use our skills as designers, that imaginary world that we have access to and access to communicate, it's a great way to get other people to buy into those solutions.
So I'm gonna actually, that makes me think of a few things that what Micaela is saying. What is more convenient, right? What ties into people's lives already? And I think that's a big part to behavior change, whether it's product oriented or even recycling. And I think can't remember if they came from the school, but definitely was a big part of my life in the Peace Corps when we're talking about public health and other things. I know when I was growing up, my parents never recycled, and now they do, which is kind of fun, right? They don't necessarily think about why or how, but they just do it because they saw someone else they knew do it, you know, their child, right? So in terms of creativity, you can use that kind of thinking process in a lot of ways. Additionally, for creativity, our ability to communicate is really good, right? From a visual standpoint, just like Micaela was saying, you know, we can draw things, right? We can visualize everyone's thought process. And the really key thing here among multiple stakeholders is that we all think about things differently for, you know, as individuals, but even as part of whatever industry we're coming from. And so if we all want to make sure people are on the same page, you have to kind of have that page up there. And I really love those like mural, different tools where you can kind of do that work. And it's not just within like companies that have it, like there are resources that are available for students. If you're a nonprofit, especially, there's some resources. And I think being able to kind of make people feel comfortable about opening themselves up to a workshop process without making it feel like that is something that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, adding on to that, one of the biggest things that I appreciated about being an art school and an environment student was I didn't necessarily have all of the materials that I needed for a project that I wanted to do. So being a creative mind, it was constantly substituting this, trying a new thing here, seeing what would work. And a lot of industry has very strict standards on what is allowed, what's expected, and what patterns are. And having a creative mind allows you to break a lot of those barriers. You can try and substitute in sustainable materials, see if those work. And I think it just adds a new element of environmental awareness to projects that really wouldn't have had considered it before. Again, with the communication and openness, you can cross so many cultural barriers with different groups, with drawing, artwork, that sort of thing, and get to understand a lot of people and what they value. So definitely use that as a tool to get to know people.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, designers, creatives are inherently collaborative. You know, that's just how they are. And like Professor Trumpey said about being the creative amongst other people, sometimes you're not looked at as maybe an equal or potentially a good partner. That's happened to me so many times. It's hard to count now. But you know, you guys are at the University of Michigan if you're a student there, and it's just when I recruit students to come to the University of Illinois, it's the same pitch. It's that you have the opportunity at that school to work with people beyond the art school, right? In the art school and outside of it. And that was what I loved about Michigan when I was there was, you know, a lot of my friends were in the art school, but I was able to take classes and meet people in tons of different areas, which have affected my creative work. And so that way it's my pitch to not go to a private school, basically. But here where I work, you know, I'm doing this work with paper and I'm making paper as an art form. So making paper is an art practice, but it's also, I also look at it from a scientific perspective. I'm able to hear, I work with a guy in engineering who has been able to take the papers under a scanning electron microscope and look at all these details of these plant fibers at 500 times magnification to know, hey, this one has potential to do this. And then I take it to someone else at the university who does actual testing on paper and can give me the pH, he can give me the foldability score, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, that's beyond my creative practice. But these other people helping me and giving me assistance in my work, I think has been profound here. And I wouldn't be able to do that without them. But at the same time, they're really interested in the type of work that I'm doing because it's the exact opposite, you know, of what they're doing at times, right? Their scientific method. I'm like, I'm kind of doing that, but not really. And so they get kind of blown away about how creatives work, and they want to learn more. I feel like I've tangented off your question a little bit, but I think it's been my experience going to school at Michigan was critical thinking. Like that's what I got the most out of school. I was really bad at design back then. It took like a life journey to get better where I am now, but it was critical thinking that really hit me when I was there. So I'll just leave it there.
No, that's great. That's right in line. I mean, I think that idea of critical thinking and that outsider status of, I think as a creative community, how do we leverage that into a superpower, is really empowering. And I think that's one of the things we've need to get our students and our friends that use creative process to understand that there is a strength to being that outsider, and making the time to build relationships with folks beyond you who you need to partner with, and learning ways to work together to a point of positivity where they're saying yes to some of your ideas and you're saying yes to some of their ideas, and it's truly collaborative, and it moves things forward. And that's certainly been my experience. I mean, working with policies that say no, you can't do what you want to do, but being able to work together with folks and say, well, what, let's talk about that. Why is that a hard no? Where do we find the softness in that answer to be able to work together to do something new? And I think it's in that newness that the creative process helps us move forward. And certainly, I certainly appreciate, Eric, your emphasis on this time crunch. So, I think I'd be curious to hear, because I think just working with climate change and environmental sustainability, it's so much bad news often. I mean, we see this overwhelmingness of it, and we've got less than a decade to cut our emissions by half, and like you could spend every night of the week fretting and not sleep at all. So, how do you use your work as a foil to that? I mean, how do we maintain positivity and keep us at the table? I mean, the nature of a wicked problem is really wicked and can be overwhelming. And I know working with environment students, and I mean, it takes a special kind of gut to get in there and say, oh, I'm not scared, but like at the same time, it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes down to like what you said, like people become apathetic about it. The more scary it is, the less action happens. In fact, there's a new book by Michael E. Mann. I had it up here. I was going to pull it down, but it's called The New Climate War. And his argument really is that the people who are telling you be scared into inaction, right? The climate deniers who have existed for decades have been just denying it. Now they're saying it's here, but you can't do anything about it. You might as well just give up. That's what his point is that you shouldn't listen to that. And you shouldn't fall into apathy, because apathy is inaction. You become frozen. And that's the opposite of what we need right now. So for me personally, as a creative person, specifically over this pandemic where I'm home and I'm also experiencing grief and loss during this time period, on top of, climate concerns, I just drove all of that into working with people, in fact, that I met on LinkedIn. I hardly used LinkedIn until March 2020. And then I started to really, really use it. And so I'm working with a group called, it's called climatedesigners.org. And we've been doing projects since last summer, channeling all of our frustration, energy, ideas into something positive, because that's really all you can do. I mean, you got to turn that fear into momentum somehow. And so that's how I've been doing it, but I'd love to hear what other people have been doing, because that'll just help me too, I think.
I'm gonna jump in because I like to talk. So I think, yeah, definitely. I'm in an enviable position where we do tree planting. And so people can plant trees as a volunteer. They can also lead volunteer efforts. We have a citizen forester program where as a super volunteer, you get training and then can lead other volunteers. So you can build up leadership skills. And people are always, it's very transformative event for folks. So whether it's tree planting or something else, like when you've already decided to sign up and volunteer for a tree planting, and now we're here to show you how to go through that process in a way that makes it easy. We make it easy. So I invite students to be in a position to make it easy for others. But when we go through a demonstration, they dig their own hole, they plant the tree at the right height, make sure that root collar is above grade, make sure that mulch is pulled away so the tree can breathe. And then they water the tree and they're like, oh, that wasn't so hard, So I invite everyone to make that the same for other folks, no matter what the sustainability challenge is. But also, I think maybe what you're saying is like you're engaging with other people that maybe you may not have before. And I think that's so key in these conversations. And I think for me, like if I know as a student, like having that hyper focus on a project, like you're going to figure out that solution, what the best solution is for that particular moment. Take that laser focus and, apply it to an issue or concern, because you're right. If you think of everything, you can be really bogged down. But if you have laser focus, you can then peel back those layers of like, who are the people that are helping to solve this, or who wants to try also to solve it. The other thing I was thinking as well, let's see if I can remember it. Okay, I lost my train of thought, but I will jump back in and let someone else speak.
I think we're touching on a lot of points of like engaging with others and maintaining that sense of community. I think when you're like feeling like, oh, it's all on me, it's just like I'm the only one that's doing this. Like at my company, when I'm trying to push a message of social responsibility and I'm talking to the accountants, we're like, but it doesn't make financial sense. I'm like, I'm the only one who cares. Like it can really get to you. But as soon as somebody else steps up and says, oh, I also care, what are you doing about that? They make you accountable. And then how can you be that person for someone else? So become the person who's asking the people, what are they doing? I think my role in kind of pushing forward values within my company is like kind of an internal PR role of just talking about it and talking about it and talking about it, making sure people know that somebody else cares. And it inspires other people to care as well. And you build that community and everyone kind of pulls in together.
I remember the other thing I was saying, thinking, and I love that, Micaela. I love that, like being that partner and being that person for other folks in your organization. We're creatives, right? Reach out to a scientist. Like if you don't know one already, there's folks like if you're in the state of Michigan, reach out to different folks. They are notoriously underfunded, but they're very passionate people. And as creatives, if you're a passionate person, you just build off of another creative person, or passionate person. Scientists are pretty cool people, and they love sharing what they're doing. So if it ties in, like you're gonna have a great conversation.
Yeah, I guess adding on to that, in a way, climate change almost feels like a giant final exam. Like it's coming. You're either going to put in your all and hope that it comes out well, or you're going to sit there and the deadline's going to pass and nothing's accomplished. We're kind of on a giant team project on this one. And yeah, working together is key, but on that note, you do have to put in your own all, and that's different for everyone. It's important we all come with different skills, different barriers and boundaries in that, but figuring out what your skills are, how your creative design can aid in that is really important to come together as a community, and to recognize your own flaws in the system, whether you can change those in any way, or if you need to talk to someone to see if they can make up for that in that sense.
Daisy, do you have any specific context about being part of SLE in that sense?
Yeah.
SLE is the Sustainable Living Experience.
Yeah, Sustainable Living Experience is a small freshman housing group on campus. Then older students work as mentors. It's a really great program. Overall, the freshmen had a lot of leadership opportunities, and so did the mentors, but it was a great way to connect with all sorts of different groups on campus, whether it be other sustainable groups or someone completely outside of your area. I remember we had one student that really wanted to focus on bugs as a source of protein for food, which where we were at, it wasn't really a hot topic, but then all of a sudden it started popping up. One of my other friends was researching bugs for food, and trying to meet different people around campus that have different perspectives on issues like that. And I mean, you can find someone in engineering that's researching bugs, but yeah, definitely connect with people on campus. There's all sorts of different platforms for that. Stamps can connect you with people.
Yeah. Yeah, you all had Cricknick, I remember. A picnic with cricket-based foods.
Yeah, cricket powder pancakes were delicious. Would highly recommend.
I think everyone kind of emphasized a theme that I strongly believe in, and that's, you know, having some sort of a community that you belong to, whether or not it's loose-knit or close-knit, tight-knit. That really helps kind of take on the eco-anxiety, and that's one of the main things I've learned directing this group of incoming first-year undergrads that are anxious. They want to make contributions, but it's overwhelming. And just being able to have friends that share those concerns, and, you know, the idea of you can't do everything, but you can do something. And, you know, I think everyone was kind of talking about scoping. If you look at the big scope, it's really hard, but if you scope it down enough to things that you can do, it becomes more manageable, and bite by bite, things happen, and the needle starts to move. So that's great.
I also, sorry, just want to add on to that. It's never too late to reach out to someone again. If you made a connection freshman year or in high school and it's 5 years later, email them again. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you. Try and set up a meeting. I mean, technology has kind of taken over our lives, and in a lot of ways, it's really harmed the art community. You don't get to see each other's work and have those important discussions or get some of the learning that you wanted. But in another way, it's a great source of communication to reach back out to people. Everyone's getting on board with it in terms of different generations. So connect.
Yeah. And I think that is an advantage of a big university too. I don't know how it is, Eric, at Illinois. You know, it's kind of a double-edged sword that, you know, when I look at the big picture and go, my God, there's 45,000 students on campus. You know, why do I only have 20 students that signed up to live in the sustainable community? Or why do we only have 50 students wanting to work with the campus farm? But then, you know, you look at it and, oh, that glass is half full. We've got 50 people working at the campus farm, and we've got 20 students working together on this issue. So we can always grow. So kind of along those lines, I'm curious, since we do have quite a few students in the audience here today with us, wondering what advice each of you have for students in the pipeline thinking about creativity in the environment. And then let's just start there. What advice would you give undergraduates or graduate students, or both?
So I teach undergraduates, so maybe I can give some input here. Hopefully it's good advice. A lot of them who are interested in using their creative skills to have positive social impact, positive environmental impact, get to become seniors, and then they start, you know, really fretting about jobs, and rightfully so. They start looking for that as a job title, right? You know, like, I don't know, social impact designer. And those actually exist, right? They actually do have those job titles, but they usually do not, from the majority standpoint, list it that way. And so I usually tell them, like, even though like your job title says X as a creative person, it doesn't mean that you cannot follow your passions at your job, right? So with the climate designer group that I work with, we always say we're all climate designers, even though it's not our job title, right? Like we are working towards positive impact. And so the things that we do know that have that can make change or reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we should just do them and not worry about what our job title is, right? So that's the advice I give them. You kind of have to make your own way sometimes with that. And it was a lesson I learned over many years. So that's what I usually say.
That is exactly what I was going to say. Just don't be afraid to make your role into what you want it to be. I started out at this job being like, oh, I wanted a social impact job, but I got into commercial design. I'll learn about that for a few years, then I'll switch industries, or I'll start my own company, or I'll do like something that's more focused on that. And there's obviously the age-old argument of like, do you change things from within, or do you like burn it down and start something new? I was like, I got to be working from outside of the system, and I've kind of found this role of social impact within a company that's already doing big work, that already is well positioned in this mass industry, where the little choices that I make day to day do have a big impact. And then when I a few years ago, I was thinking like, oh, like I'm still in commercial design. I haven't like fulfilled my life values. I told them that I was interested in going to grad school to try to shift my career more in that direction. And they were willing to work with me. They were like, what can you do at this company to make that more of a reality for your position? When you have coworkers, they care about what you care about. They care about you as a person. So expressing again what you want and what you care about, people, I think, will surprise you and really make room for what you want your life to be.
Yeah, don't sell yourself short. You got a degree in a specific area, and that's a good thing. It's meant to help you. Don't let it impede you from trying a new area or letting it dictate what people say you can become. Maybe you have had this experience in college, had your major, and then you find a job that's completely something else. Go out, find the skills that you need to get that. Don't just sit in one position just because it's what you did in the past. You can always have a new future.
My piece of advice is hustle, and know that if you can get a full-time job out of school, awesome. If you can't, that's okay, right? And if you have to put together a couple different jobs to make it work, that's what you need to do in order to get the things you need done now, right? Just like Daisy was saying, like, it doesn't mean that this is how it's always going to be. There's nothing wrong with learning discipline. I think as creatives, we like to do all sorts of different things and be able to have that time and space to go through that process. And outside of school, you may not always have that. And so learning the discipline of a specific role, and if it's not for you, that's okay, but that's where you are right now. And just keep moving, keep talking to people. The path to where you go is to, I don't know, circuitous, but it's not straight. I'm sure your parents have said that. I'm sure like a mentor has said that, but it's absolutely true. I have had many jobs, and before I became the director, I was actually recruited back. I worked like 3 or 4 different jobs, like in succession. I grew up in the Chinese restaurant business, so getting my hands dirty is not, if you have never had a retail job, which I would be very surprised, do it. Get in a retail job, because the more experiences you have, depending on what, wherever you're coming from, the better you'll be at being resilient. And the whole thing about climate change is that you need to be resilient. We need some of the things that we can, there's a time, we have a limited amount of time in some ways, but there are things that are happening right now that need to be mitigated now. So you can work on a lot of different levels, and whether it's your day job that's making that happen is one thing, but you can get to that place. But just know that whatever you're doing right after you graduate from school is just the next step.
That's great. Thank you all. I think we'll pivot a little bit into some more specific content questions that are relevant to each of you in your professional practices. So maybe we'll start with kind of the role of sustainability in the design world. So Eric, you reflecting a bit more on graphic design, and Micaela, you about industrial design. I mean, you both seem to work a lot about sourcing and actually creating sustainable material chains. So if you could reflect on that process a little bit for us, and how do we grow those chains? Is it visible to consumers or invisible, or the special role of a designer, and how do we get rid of these crappy materials and get better materials?
Okay, so from graphic design perspective, you know, at Michigan, when I was a student there, you know, predominantly like the education was, you know, Bauhaus, Swiss modernism, and, you know, this sort of loose marriage with corporatism in what I learned, right? And so it was very helpful in finding a job, and eventually I just started to think about what I was doing and what I was making and who I was working with and why. And it became too much for me to really answer. And I ended up going to grad school to look for those answers. And that's where, you know, sustainability was then my focus, right? And there wasn't a lot out there for graphic designers, to be honest. I mean, I found things, and, you know, they'd be in a book, and then there'd be another thing in a different book, but they were never really collected holistically into something. Now, I could read architecture books and find out a heck of a lot, or landscape, or, you know, anything like that. But for me, like, that process of trying to design something from that perspective, sustainability was a complete mystery, right? But I worked through grad school on that, and sort of curated then. That was, you know, my nonprofit was one of the first things out there on this online, and that was curated, not just a link dump, you know, like, go look at this, go look at that. So for me, it was, you know, someone said it, you know, hustling, blazing your own trail, for sure. But now there's so much more. Now there's so much more out there. It's almost like criminal that people aren't doing it, because it's just so saturated out there. It's just, I don't know why. There's just too much information, so people can't all absorb it all, but it's there. And so I would just suggest, you know, if this is something you want to do, and I'm assuming you're here so you want to, you're going to have to ask around. And I mean, I found a lot, you know, of great people on LinkedIn just to talk with, right? And if you're a student and you see someone interesting you want to talk with, they're probably, you know, willing to talk to you and give you more help on this. That's what I found. And so anyways, like, but in the industry, right, you have a lot of bottom line decisions being made, right? What's the cheapest way to get this done? So you're up against a, you know, uphill battle there. And the more educated you are on how to surpass that, the better. For me, I just had to learn, like, how to speak different languages. And what I mean by that is, like, how do you talk to someone who's a project manager versus an accountant versus a lawyer, right? So as an example, I worked at Texas Instruments, and they were trying to make their calculators that were the expensive ones feel more expensive. So they wanted to add more weight to them. It wasn't metal, it was plastic that looked like metal. So they started putting lead in the calculator to add to the weight of the calculator. And so I don't know what they were thinking, right? And I had, you know, talking to the lawyer, I'm like, it's risk management here, right? That's what the conversation was about. Like, you cannot put lead in a calculator. That is a lawsuit ready to happen as soon as someone finds out, right? You can't hide it. It breaks and it comes open, there's lead, and then you contaminated some family, right? You can't do that. So anyways, like the more you know, the better you're going to be able to compete in a job market and also make better decisions. And I'll just stop there so other people can talk.
Wow, that's horrifying. In industrial design, so like my whole job is directly tied to the use of natural resources. So when I choose a material for a product, it's literally tied to deforestation or mining or like chemical byproducts. And I have found that the sourcing process is the most difficult thing about putting a product out in the world in general, and then like putting out a sustainable product on top of that makes it even harder. It takes a lot of hustle. It takes a lot of time vetting your factories, vetting your materials themselves. I think there's a lot of lack of transparency in the supply chain where sometimes you just can't, like you're never going to be able to see into it. So maybe you have to distance yourself from a particular material and design around that. One example recently, we've got like some established factories that we've been working with for like a decade. Our plastics factory, we know them really well. We know their family. We know our silicone factory. So when I propose a new material, I'm just aware that I'm proposing everything that goes along with vetting the factory, vetting the material, vetting everything down that sourcing line. So recently we tried to, or we pitched a organic cotton produce bag to take and put like your apples and whatever. And we sold it into Meijer and Target. Everyone was excited about it. And then we got into the nuts and bolts of sourcing cotton in China. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the forced labor of the Uyghur people on cotton farms in China right now. And there was like just a hard line of, we need to be able to verify that our cotton is coming from a good source, and digging deep into like the way cotton is processed comes from multiple farms and is aggregated. You can't know exactly where your cotton, like bag by bag, is coming from. So we made the decision of like, okay, if we can't figure it out, we're not going to use cotton. Polyester made from fossil fuels, maybe not a great solution, but maybe better than this. So you just kind of have to weigh material by material. Sometimes you find a good solution in new recycled plastic, but it's only made in Tennessee, so you have to ship it across the world and then ship it back, and then you've got all of the carbon that comes with that. So just taking the time to go through every step when something presents itself as promising, there are a lot of kind of hidden consequences. So it's really difficult. And I don't have any good solutions. You just like put in the time and you do your best. And you put in a lot of design effort into avoiding those pitfalls as much as possible. And then hopefully on the mass scale, it ultimately makes some sort of difference, moves the dial.
Yeah, right on. You do what you can and hope that it sticks and you can scale it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think we'll have one last question here with Faye, and then we'll open it up for group discussion too. So Faye, since you work with communities so closely, I'm wondering if you could reflect on, kind of your role as a community activist and synergist to make that sustainability needle move in a positive direction, and maybe even reflect some on your creative role and the experiences you have as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, how that helps shapes some of the action that you take.
Sure. So I'm going to start with the Peace Corps volunteer experience. I probably have said I said the same thing a couple of different ways, but living in a space where you feel uncomfortable because you're not from there is a great way of learning empathy and learning how other people think, and then learning to listen. I think we sometimes live in echo chambers, because it's comfortable. We want to have our connections and our tribes, but understanding how other people live is a great way of connecting with people at any level. And as far as creativity and working with community members, I think the biggest thing is, and I share this with all of our partners, whether it's municipal or other nonprofit partners, but imagine, and I'll use tree planting as an example, is that we're asking folks if they want trees. We're creating information, providing information, and making it as accessible as possible. Multiple channels, whether it's for flyering, if we're talking on the phone, hosting a Zoom event, and we're basically taking something that can be complex, like the urban forest, tree planting, and making it simple, making it easy, and making it bite-sized. We use social media for that as well, but everyone, word of mouth is always best. Like if your friend told you about something they really liked, you're gonna be more inclined to be open to that piece of information. So I think it's really important to also think about, when you're thinking about community members, you're also a community member in your own space. And when we talk about trees, if someone came into my neighborhood and said, hey, would you like a tree planted? Well, that sounds great. But you give them a week, you're not giving them a lot of time to kind of think through that. You want to plant on a Saturday? That's my day off. Like, so kind of be aware of those things. Like if you were in the same situation, how would you feel about that? And then if you're saying, hey, would you like a free tree? And you know what? Plant it yourself. I would be so upset. So those are just some like small things. It seems really obvious, but when we kind of think of like solving a problem, we think of it from the outside, which is not a bad thing, but also think about it from the inside.
That's great. Thank you so much. So now I think I'll let Sarah and Casey kind of moderate some Q&A from the audience here, so y'all can take over here.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a question come in that it looks like Eric and some other people addressed already, but maybe we can open it up to the whole panel. The question asks, how can artists and art students practice sustainability even if their work doesn't specifically address this issue?
I definitely agree with Eric as far as materials, but honestly, anything can be a sustainable problem if you think about it within that context. Look at your art, think about where you're going to show it, why you're doing it, how it could make a sustainable impact. It doesn't necessarily have to drive home that message of, yeah, sustainability, but it is cool when you find out neat little facts about it, like South Quad Dining. All their red chairs in there are made out of recycled pop cans. It's not something that's super advertised, but it's a neat little fact that when you find out that U of M put all this thought into some of their design and actually looked at some sustainable options, you wish it were more widely publicized. But I think it's good to have that surprising fact of sustainable design kind of like spread into design.
At my company, we've got kind of a checklist of sustainability steps that we always kind of have top of mind, but it's nice to check in with. So even if we're designing something else that doesn't have directly to do with replacing single-use bottles or whatever it is, we check back in with that checklist and say, like, have we made this as durable as possible so it'll last a long time? Have we made sure we've got like 10 things on the list of just like having some like baseline. So no matter what you're doing, even if it's not a sustainability project, you are reminding yourself of your goals and your processes.
For artists and art students who, I guess how do they practice sustainability, even if their work doesn't specifically address this? I guess I'm interpreting this question as if their day-to-day is not about sustainability. From a work standpoint, it doesn't mean that you can't do it from a personal standpoint. And just the way I think, even pre-pandemic, people have side gigs. People really focus on something that really interests them. And sometimes they're able to leverage that into something bigger. like whether it's like influencing through Instagram or doing Etsy. I think that's always really interesting that folks are able to do so many cool things, even if their day-to-day isn't. And it lets you to allow you to have that creativity to really explore something that seems really small and inane, but like now you know something more about like water quality, or something that you wouldn't have if you didn't allow yourself that time to explore outside of your day-to-day life.
I think it's also critical to note how you're getting rid of your art supplies and disposing of things properly. I mean, some teachers will teach you about how to properly get rid of paints, what you're doing with your oils, that sort of thing. One of my friends on Facebook started a buy-sell trade group for art supplies among U of M students. I can track that down for you guys, but just trying to be cognizant of where your materials are going, who they're going to, and which communities they're going to impact later.
I saw in the chat, Eric, that you also kind of touched on materials. Do you want to kind of explain what you were talking about with us?
Sure. So this came up in many times, but one particular example would be during one of our MFA critiques here in our art school where I'm teaching. It was a sculpture critique, and a lot of the faculty were using basically styrene or polystyrene in their work, and they were excited about what they could do with it, and they were sort of evangelizing it to the other MFA students to use, and a number of the students were not interested in using plastic in their work for environmental reasons and just their own personal reasons, but they weren't necessarily trying to spread some sort of message, which was, I think, in Emily's question, like they weren't trying to say anything about sustainability or the climate, but they just didn't want to use styrene in their work. So just the conversation I had with these grad students was about materials, saying, well, you don't have to take that message about the environment into your work, but you can just swap out the materials so you don't have to worry about the implications of what you're using. So in the end, this particular grad student, a couple of grad students ended up using my paper lab to make pulp or slurry to then sculpt. And they were able to sculpt that in three-dimensional forms and then sheet forms and make the work that they wanted to make, but they were making it out of corn, or they were making it out of prairie grass as opposed to plastic. So, and you didn't know, you can't tell, like what they ended up painting over it or something. So it wasn't like so clear that this was, corn or whatever. So that's just one small example.
I was thinking also, I think it came up in the chat or maybe in the conversation, but when you're looking at materials, oftentimes in manufacturing, we're looking for the lowest cost, right? That makes a lot of sense. If you're able to kind of turn that also to consider the ecosystem cost to that, we undervalue I don't know if people are folks are familiar with the term ecosystem services, but what would it cost to build a machine that would clean X amount of stormwater, right? Your utility is very aware of how much it costs them, like millions and millions of dollars, right? Billions of dollars, depending on their NPDES permit. So what would it cost to cool your house, right? In the summer, because there's no trees, right? You can literally look at those costs by looking at your utility bill. This information is out there, and if you're using it to help tell a story of what the values are that are not normally considered, I think that builds a better case. I think when you're talking in a business sense, it's really about creating value. And if that value is in dollars, like maybe it's more traditional, but like because the way more people are aware, I think I would hope and I understand that younger generations really kind of we care more about this, and so we're gonna buy things from places that respect those values. That is a story that's really important when you're talking about creating value. Like the dollars are not just like the immediate, like the 1 cent, 10 cents per piece, it's the value of the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for your answers. We had another question in the chat from Bruce, and he asked about non-fungible tokens, which are a big topic of conversation lately, and directly pitting art markets and artists trying to learn a living against the environment that is usually the case. Any opinions on how to best address this very new issue? If anyone has opinions on that. We also have a couple other questions as well.
Say real quick. Yeah, like the same with cryptocurrencies, right? And I know that a lot of the NFTs use cryptocurrencies, but Ethereum and Bitcoin and whatnot. But I mean, it's an issue of like cloud data servers, right? And the carbon emissions from that. That's where the problem exists. And a lot of these cloud servers can be use as much energy as an entire city. So it's huge. And so, Apple and Intuit and Amazon are all I think Apple's already renewable for their servers, but they have to move that way and it won't be much of an issue anymore from a carbon emission standpoint. But NFTs in general, they're a bubble. It's a bubble right now. I mean, it's a new thing, and my grad student made like $800 on a small animation he did, selling that, and it helps, for sure for, artists to earn an income, but it is a bubble in terms of how long you're going to be able to get $800 for a GIF is a question, in my mind, but I might jump in on it too, just to be honest, just for check it out.
Not near cool enough to be in the NFT market,
man. We haven't really talked about this too much, but I feel like as students, I don't know if the art school has changed or undergraduate education has changed, but the financial aspects of how the world works in terms of economics. If you're selling your art now, that's amazing. You kind of already have a hold on that, an understanding of that. But there are, I think maybe because we just talked about non-fungible cryptocurrencies, right? Other areas that you could use your creativity for sustainability, real estate. Real estate is a funny world, and it's like making money out of nothing in a way, and it has all sorts of implications that for social implications, environmental implications, and if you're looking into a new area that you just never thought about, like real estate, like who thinks about real estate? But maybe when you're middle aged, you're like, oh, everyone thinks about it, and like what's the values? But it's really intriguing, and if you want to think about sustainability, social, environmental, ecological sustainability, it's an area that's definitely interesting to look into as well.
Those are all of our questions that are in the chat right now. If anybody else has quick questions that they'd like to chime in and just unmute themselves and ask before we wrap up here in the next couple of minutes, please feel free to do that, or Casey and I'd be happy to read them from the chat as well. So if anyone has any of those quickly, I guess one question I would like to kind of go back to, as Faye was talking about like value, especially within like companies and this younger generation, I'm curious if any of the panelists have thoughts on kind of this concept of greenwashing and how we can make sure that we're navigating this space of sustainability in a way that we're sharing information in an accurate way, especially in an age where information can be distorted in so many different ways with social media and all of that. So I'm just curious with value in greenwashing, if there's any thoughts there for students to consider going forward.
To that, I say dig in. Every company will want to make themselves look better than they are. If you're looking for a job and you're interviewing, you are just as much interviewing them as they are you. Just keep asking questions. If they can't answer something, dig in a little more, research it. There's a lot of things that they'll want to tell you to make them sound good, and it won't necessarily be true. And it's better to find out before you get there, or if you get there, a way that you can change it. You don't want to get stuck.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. Put in the chat, there's a 7 sins of greenwashing. So you can kind of identify it. One of the best ones I saw, to be honest with you, was I bought these chips and they had this circular logo or icon on it that was green and white, and it said something, and from a glance it looked like the USDA organic logo, but it wasn't. It was just them impersonating it to do extra crunchy or something in it. So really evil, and it worked, and I bought it, and then I was let down, afterwards. But that's just, that's on that list too, is basically lying. You definitely need to do your homework, unfortunately, but transparency and honesty are, some of the things that in particular younger generations like yours demand in their products, whether it be something they see on Instagram or whatever. This is a growing trend within that particular demographic, and it has been, it's kind of a domino effect. So, they are definitely working, companies are definitely working towards that in general, like Everlane is an example, Patagonia, clothing companies that are really showing you the details of where their fabrics are coming from. I think we talked about cotton earlier. Super important to find that information out. And yeah, I think the vague, people saying very vague things, you can already tell right away that's probably fake. It's not something that you should trust. But the more detail, I think you're going to feel more comfortable with their answers.
If you have the opportunity before you graduate, try and take an environmental policy or law class just to get some background knowledge on that. Even the EPA in that has surprised me with lack of consideration for the environment and how we deal with testing and the whole Flint crisis. It's honestly wild and very sad. So be skeptical of any organization, even if it says environmental in the name.
Be skeptical. Thank you, Daisy. Good. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you. Casey has a couple of closing remarks that we'll pivot over to him, but big thank you to our alums for joining us. It was really great. So great to see so many people here and familiar faces in the audience. And big thanks again to Melissa for organizing. So over to you, Casey, for those closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Joe, for moderating the event today, and to my fellow Stamps student ambassador, Sarah, for joining us this evening, and Melissa for organizing this. And thank you to Micaela, Faye, Daisy, and Eric for joining us in our talk today. I think that this conversation has really offered us an opportunity to really come together as a community, and I appreciate all of you that were able to join and connect with us today. We'll be sending out a link later with the recording for you to either rewatch or be able to share this with other people. And yeah, we just thank you again for taking the time to join us tonight, and we hope you all have a great evening.